In today's video, we're going to be doing a foam pumpkin makeover for fall. Hey, I'm Stacy. Welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy and are inspired to create. We're going to jump right in. I used some Waverly chalk paint to paint these pumpkins as a base coat. And these pumpkins are on clearance right now. These little ones are $2 and they're watermelon pumpkins. So unfortunately, I forgot to turn the camera on, so I didn't get the footage of it, but I do show at the very end of the video what it was when we started. And so they need some sort of base coat, whether you're using chalk paint, some sort of primer, gesso, but the Waverly chalk paint is amazing. If you allow it to dry in between, it only takes about 2 coats. And then we're using some magic foam clay from Crayola. I know they have some of this at the dollar store or Dollar General. Sometimes it's under different brands. Like I know there's like a Sesame Street brand. If you're gonna paint it, you can use colored clay and then you just paint over it with that Waverly chalk paint to do a primer, and you can use whatever color there is. So check your Dollar Generals, check your Dollar Trees, because you can get it for much cheaper. I got mine at, I believe, Michael's, and got a big tub of it with multiple bags and used a coupon, and I think it was like, I don't know, 10 or 15 bucks. But I think you can get it for less to shop around. What I'm using here is a candy mold. It's like a cake candy mold or fondant mold. I got it at a garage sale in a box of stuff. It was like a grab box of all these crafting things. If you don't have any leaves, you can use die cuts with paper and do this opposite. You could use fake, like your silk leaves, you know, wood pieces. The creativity is up to you, but this is what I used. I'm going to do my best to explain to you everything that I'm doing. This is really the first time I've ever made a pumpkin like this or transformed a pumpkin. I've used similar with die cuts and paper and gesso on my Christmas ornaments, so it wasn't uncharted territory for me, but I'm telling you, if you haven't done something like this, you can do it. Especially using a mold. And this mold is so thin that I'm able to pull them out. I just let it, the amount of time you've seen me to push those into the mold is the amount of time I let them dry. You just have to pull them easy because this clay will hold a lot of detail. And then I'm just using Barely Art Glue. I like mapped them out where I wanted to lay them on the pumpkin, and I cut a lot of the extra footage out, but that's what I did. And then I'm using the Barely Art Glue to glue it to the pumpkin itself, and it will hold. I've done this with my ornaments. It's what I use. It's not really much different. You're just starting with a plastic ornament base versus a foam pumpkin. And I actually layered them on top of each other, and you're gonna see I don't show you everything because otherwise this video would be hours and hours long. And I molded them up, and I'll show you here in a little bit, but I jumped ahead to the acorns, and I just created the top of the acorn and the base, and then I kind of roll it on the edge to kind of taper it on the bottom of my glass mat. And then I attached the two, and these dried for a couple of days. They take a little while longer. Those leaves, I let them dry overnight. I don't even think it was a full 24 hours, and I was able to attach them and then put another base coat of the chalk paint, which I'll show you right after I'm done doing these acorns. But when you take a heat gun to this foam clay, just don't hold it there very long because it is meant to emboss, so it will melt plastic. It's just enough to dry it. And then I painted it with folk art acrylic paint, and I did put the colors up there. And then I'm going to take this Waverly antique wax, and it doesn't do much to the top but knock down some of the sheen, like the shine on it, but on the bottom it does. It distresses it a bit, and you can put more or less however you want to do it. Now here's where I attached all these leaves to the pumpkin. And I let it dry overnight. Like I said, it wasn't even a full 24 hours later, and it was for the most part dry. They were a little more flexible, but really if you want the best result, let it dry for at least 48 hours if the clay is this thin. or 72. It just depends on the thickness of your clay. I was able to get away with it because it was so thin. And then I'm not doing the entire pumpkin. I'm just doing the chalk paint on the actual clay itself and putting a base coat over it. And then we're gonna go in and use some colors. And I use Distress Oxide sprays. And when we get to that, I'll explain a little bit more about Distress Oxide sprays or Tim Holtz Distress products, because they're risky to use in crafts like this because they are water reactive. But I'll explain to you how I worked around that and why I chose them. And then I'm coating, once that all dried with the chalk paint, I'm going over it with Mod Podge, and I'm using the matte finish. This is optional. I probably wouldn't, once I decided to use the Distress Oxide after this, because at this point I didn't know where I was going with it, I probably wouldn't base coat any of it with a Mod Podge. I would do it after, which I do. But I would do it after. This is not necessary if you're going to color it with something else or other paints, because you could paint this with acrylics. Watercolors you could do. It might be a little risky with the leaves. You may want to base coat them if you're going to use watercolors, because I've had this clay, if I've gotten it too wet, it'll break down again even after it's dry. It would take a lot of water. What I'm doing here is I'm just roughly masking off the leaves because these are sprays that I have. I could have used the ink pad with a sponge applicator, but I have the sprays as well, and I wanted to see what different effects I could get with these sprays. That's why I chose to use them. In the end, did it make much of a difference over acrylic paint? Probably not. There is some different depth because Distress Oxide sprays are a dye and pigment ink based spray, and they are water reactive. I see a lot of videos where people use distress ink and they call it distressing ink because they're using it to distress. And if your product will never get wet, your end product, you're good. If it's something that you're going to get wet, it will reactivate and it will bleed and you'll have a hot mess on your hands. So I'm going to show you what I did to get around that with this pumpkin. And like I said, the reason I did it with these is I wanted to see the different effects I could get with the sprays, which were really cool. They don't totally show up in the video, but there was different depths, especially in those leaves. And I think it would have been much more intense if I didn't do the Mod Podge first. Like I said, this is the first time I've ever done this and experiment with the Distress Oxide sprays. You could use Distress inks as well. And as you could see there, I just shook up you need to make sure they're shooken up really well so the pigment and the dye inks mix together. But I did spray some out of my glass mat, and that was Carved Pumpkin, the orange was, and this is Shabby Shudders, which is a green color. And I just am painting the leaves versus spraying it because I didn't want it to overspray into the pumpkin. But because these inks are opaque, I could have sprayed it completely with the orange and not masked it and then just painted over with the green, that green color on the leaves. Would the orange have bled through a little bit? Probably. But when you use these on paper, they layer and you can't see the color underneath them like you can with regular distress ink, because these are opaque versus being transparent or translucent. And then here's where I'm coming back in with the matte finish Mod Podge. And you have to coat this product, otherwise even moisture in the air could reactivate those inks. So is that the choice that you'll go with on your pumpkin? Maybe, maybe not. If you have them in your stash, use them. If you have Mod Podge or some sort of sealant in your stash, use them because it'll be sealed. But if you don't have it, I would suggest using acrylic paints or some other form to color your clay or your pumpkin. And then I'm taking the Waverly Antique Wax and I'm going to go over it. I'm using a paintbrush because I feel like I have a little more control. And you can add as little or a lot depending on how antique you want it. And I went in kind of what I consider conservative. I didn't want it super antiqued. I wasn't sure if I just wanted certain parts antiqued. And I really wanted to work it into the grooves of those leaves. So I'm really taking the paintbrush and layering it up. And the more and you can wipe it away. I'm going to show you here. You wipe it away. But even if you're not happy with that, and I like the Mod Podge down first so that I can kind of control the wax and wipe it up more if I want to. You could get your paper towel a little bit more wet. You could use a baby wipe and take even more off. You could dip your paintbrush into water, which I do show in a little bit. And that Mod Podge down on the bottom of the pumpkin where it wasn't clay, it was just the foam portion that had been painted over. It really wanted to take that wax and differently. So it showed like the streaks from the paintbrush. And I liked that. To me, it looked like wood. And you'll see how I put some water down on my glass mat. That's what I did. I sprayed it out of a water bottle. And it thins out the wax a little bit. And see how more came up? So you can make it as thick or as light as you want. And if you add a little bit too much, just dampen your paper towel or your paintbrush or whatever you're using to apply it and remove some. Even if you go over it and it doesn't come up with a little bit of water, it will. Especially with that Mod Podge being down as your base coat. And I just keep continuing to work it around, and I really try to get into the grooves of the pumpkin and those leaves so that those details get picked up. So I really have to apply quite a bit to get down into the grooves of the leaves since they're recessed. And then I just wipe the excess away. This was really fun, guys. If you haven't done a craft like this before, I totally encourage you to try it. If you saw my post, I do have an entire little village of these watermelon pumpkins, and they are so much fun that my husband and I went back over the couple of days' time. We bought a few the first time because I needed one for a project that I was making for my daughter. And then they were on clearance. So I said, oh, grab a couple extra. And then once I had some ideas going, I said, oh, let's go back. It was a couple days later. And so we bought some more. And then we went back to Walmart a couple days later for something else. And they had the larger ones in. And those were $4, normally $10. And we bought them all, which there were like 8 of them, so it wasn't like we wiped out a whole shelf, and we bought the last little couple of little ones left, and my grandson was over because my daughter, this pumpkin was for her. She loves fall. He liked them, so I gave him a watermelon one. He kept calling it watermelon, and I was like, no, pumpkin, and he's like, no, watermelon, and he'll be 4. And he was shaking it, thinking he was going to hear seeds in there or something and wanted to cut it. And I said, no, it's a toy. It's a toy pumpkin or a toy watermelon. He goes, Toya? That's how he says toys. And yeah, that was really cool. This wire I got at Michael's, and I thought I'd shown it on camera. There's 2 different colors there. There's more of a copper color and one that's more of a brown color. This thinner wire that I used for the acorns, originally I just stuck the end in there and left it kind of longer. And I realized that I needed E6000 to hold it into these acorns, that there wasn't have anything. So I twisted them, I looped them over, folded them in half, twisted them so that it was like an eye hook. So if you have eye hooks, that's what you could do with your acorns. And then this heavier gauge wire, this coppery color, I twisted around a wooden dowel and then just used I think it was for jewelry making that my mother-in-law, that pokey tool, and I poked a hole in it because the foam's pretty thick to get in there, and I didn't even glue it in because it held. I could pick it up by those little twisties. And then I'm coming in with some gems I had in my stash. I'm using Barely Art glue, and I'm going to tell you those puppies are pretty adhered on there because I checked it a couple days later. Same with these pearls, and I just added them here and there. I didn't want them to overwhelm it. And the one thing I wished I would have done, which I didn't think about it until after I'd already laid all the leaves, was I would have made a custom stem. I would have made a gnarly, twisty vine stem, but I'm okay that I didn't. And then because the pearls, and they're like a champagne color, and the gems are a champagne color, they were just a little too sparkly. So I used some wax to wipe it down. And then I've got some paper flowers that were in my stash. I'm using some ink. It's probably Distress ink that's on that brush, and some wax. So if these got wet, the wax might prevent it, but if not, that ink's going to reactivate, but it's so little I wasn't worried about it. Yeah, but my grandson was making little triangle shapes with his fingers. He was like making carving motions because I was like, these are carvable pumpkins too, and that's what I was telling my daughter, and he must have understood what we were talking about, because then he started to act like he wanted to carve it, and I said, well, you take it home, you carve it with your mama. So I'm just hot gluing these flowers in. Originally I put them in with barely art glue, and they were holding up just fine. As you could see, in a couple of them I had to pull back up. It was difficult, but I decided, because of that wire kind of being in the way, I wanted to have the extra secure hot glue. And I'm just positioning a couple of them around. I tried a lace bow, I didn't like it, but here's what they originally looked like. They look like little watermelon pumpkins. And here's the finished product. And I have extra photos after this at the end, not only of them compared side by side, but staged like I did in the beginning, but there's a couple extra photos. Look at the depth. I mean, it does not look like a foam pumpkin. My daughter even said, Mom, this looks like something you would buy at like Home Goods or something. She says it doesn't look like a foam pumpkin. So give it a go. If you guys enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.